Today on the Region Free Gamers podcast, you ever wonder what happens when you walk into a Cobra triangle with a pimple and a drunk squirrel in the perfect dark? This episode.
Hello and welcome to one and all to the Region Free Gamers podcast, the podcast fluent in gaming. I'm Jeff, I'm the British one in case you've forgotten or can't quite tell. And I'll be your guide for this episode where we're going to be looking at one of the true members of British gaming royalties. And that is Rare, one of the true king and or queens, however you see fit. But, before we get into that, heavy topic, and I think we're all looking forward to this one. We want to go through really important stuff, and that's really to thank all of you, the listeners, for tuning in to yet another episode and showing your support for us. We wouldn't be at over 100 episodes now without every one of you. So thank you so much. And of course, as you all know, we're continuously looking to grow our channel. And there's plenty of ways you can support us to do that. The simplest way is doing what you're doing already, and that's listening to us squawk away for a couple of hours. And of course, we'd love it if you could leave us a like and a subscribe, potentially even a review on the platform you're currently listening to this on. So please go ahead and do that. And of course, there is that one, better way of showing your support to us. And that's to share us with all the Kremlins and the Dixies in your life. But who could forget that we have a group over on Patreon who are listening to us. Some of them listen to us live now, who are, even giving us a little bit of their coin, their gold coins or tokens over to us to help us, produce this. So, big shout out for all of you that are there. But also a big shout out to Yuise and Susie, who recently joined us. So welcome you two. I hope you both enjoy the great banter and chat that we have for everyone over on Discord, and you enjoy it. So thank you very much. And so on to today's episode, where I have with me a killer combo of hosts who are ready to bow and curtsy. And apologies, I did not give you a pre-warning in the car ride here. I didn't tell you needed to curtsy to the queen of 90s British gaming, and that is Rare. So first up is a man in the north with his own frozen banana stand. That's Paul. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
Oh, great here. How is it up in the Great North at the moment?
It's fantastic, actually. I have a story about yesterday. Let's introduce everybody else, and, I'll go into story time.
So next up, we have our very own collectathon extraordinaire, Arnie. Hey, Arnie.
Boom. What's up?
What's up, indeed. And then finally, someone who's been skidding and drifting around the open sandbox, that is Arizona, Kelly. Hey, Kelly.
Good morning, and hi, everyone.
Good morning. Actually, Kelly, this is the first time we've been on a show together, so I apologize in advance. That's all I can say.
I apologize for this.
No need for apologies.
Well, I think I've already wasted some of your time because we didn't have daylight savings over here.
I know.
So I forgot that you all got an hour closer to me, which is a scary thought. Thankfully, physically, you didn't get any closer.
Yeah, to be fair, we should be apologizing to you for the existence of daylight savings time.
On one hand, I'm like, fucking Jeff. But on the other hand, I'm like, fucking daylight savings time.
Yeah.
Like, that's even worse, honestly. I can't blame the guy. I can't blame him. Switching hours back and forth willy-nilly. Like, what the hell are we doing over here?
Well, see, it sounds stupid until you think of the farming. That all those extra hours are crucial for all the farming that we're doing.
That's a myth. I'm sorry. The truth is nobody knows why we're doing this still. Because I have some people who say, yeah, something about World War II, and then I have other people who are like, oh, the farmers. Nobody fucking knows. Nobody knows.
I always thought it was farmers. That's the lie that we've been just
that's a lie
we've
that
just been swallowing everyone for the past.
Nah, dude, that's just big farming getting in your head.
It's just to keep you on your toes. That's what it's all about.
always trying to stay relevant, aren't they, those farmers?
I think it's just one person who is so pleased that they've manipulated the entire world for so many years, and they're just laughing every year.
This is the only deep state conspiracy that's actually true, is daylight
Yes.
savings time.
Oh man,
Yeah, so
Jeff,
Paul-
can I talk about
Yeah.
what I did yesterday?
Yes.
Please.
Okay, it's actually video game related. Believe it or not, it's not going to be
Shock.
a story about the silly Yukon, although it kind of is. But yesterday is my buddy's birthday, and he managed to pull the feat, which was of getting 8 people together in one room to play Killer Queen Black on the Switch. And let me tell you, it was everything that we had hoped for. Everything we had hoped for. We had 4 people there who'd played it before, and 4 people who never played it before. It took about 3 matches. After about 3 matches, all the new players kind of got a handle on it, on what was going on. And you could see, like, once they kind of figured out, okay, so this is what we're doing with this game, you could see their eyes light up, and it was fucking on. And the amount of shit talking that was happening was obscene. Absolutely obscene. Like, I remember shit talking when I was living back in Toronto and playing fighting games all the time. That was disgusting. But we never had 8 people in a room just going at it.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. And some of these people have known each other for their whole lives, right? So when you have people who've known each other for their whole lives, there's absolutely
You can really
no
dig deep.
filter.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Vile things being said. Vile, like, hand motions and other and other pantomime. Like, oh my God.
Is this your?
It was
is this
absolutely
your,
awesome.
Is Killer Queen Black now officially like the modern version for you of like the 16-person Bomberman on the Saturn or something?
Yeah. No, there's no question. And it's more intense, man. Like, Kelly mentioned
claim.
before the show, she was talking about her Fitbit, and it instantly made me think, like, while we were playing Killer Queen, I've got like a Fitbit-ish type watch. And while we were playing, I got like a reminder on my watch, like, hey buddy, you need to relax. This is a little bit too much for you.
Your heart rate's just spiking all over the place.
Yeah, it's like, I know you're not actually moving. What is going on there? You're about to have a heart attack.
Your Fitbit's just like, this man has consumed an inordinate amount of cocaine or
Whoa.
playing video games, I guess. I don't know.
Cocaine or video games?
I once spent an afternoon with someone who was wearing a Fitbit. We were in a bar, and I've never been more annoyed sat next to someone, I think, in my life, because it just kept vibrating at them, and I was like, it's annoying me. How is this not annoying you? Like, can you just, like, because it kept vibrating the table because they were resting on it, and it's just like, could you just either turn it off? Because no, but I need to know what text I'm getting. Like, do you need to know? Do you need this?
Do you need to know? I don't think you do. I don't think you're that important.
I don't know how. So Kelly, like, it's a Fitbit. Do you? I know we're not doing any advertising on this channel, but would you endorse Fitbit?
Yes, I've actually had it for about 5 or 6 years now. So
Oh right.
Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Nice.
So your arm isn't just constantly vibrating as you do go back to
I've
daily life.
got all the notifications turned off, so I wouldn't be
Okay, there
I wouldn't
we
be
go.
the annoying one to sit next to.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just never wanted something to judge me that much constantly. That's my fear of it.
Yeah.
Is that like 2 weeks into it, I'm just like, wow, my lifestyle is horrendous. Like, I knew that going into it, but I didn't need to be reminded of it.
But they're insidious, dude. They're made to shame you, because here's what happens. I have a step goal, which I ignore, but whatever. Let's say I didn't ignore it, right?
Like all your goals.
Yeah. Make this show better. So, like, let's say my step goal is 4,000 steps for the day, right? If I meet that goal, it just increases the step goal for the next time. Then it's like,
Right.
oh, now you need to do 4,100. And then if I meet that, it just sets you up for failure, because eventually you can't do 40,000 fucking steps in a day, right? Like, so what are we doing here? Are we trying to make me feel good or what? I don't know.
Mm-mm.
No,
Yeah, and also every hour it'll be like, hey, you haven't moved 250 steps.
Oh,
You've
yeah.
You've got to get going.
my favorite move, and I know this just because like I know people in my life who have like things like this, where it's the moment at the end of the day where you're like, I guess I'm like 500 steps short, and then people just start walking around their kitchen, like doing laps around the dining room table or something, and I'm like, this is it. Like,
trained like a dog, dude.
this is where,
like honestly.
Oh Lord.
Yeah, I think, I know, like, I'm learning Italian right now, so I have an online course I'm doing, and I have like my own textbooks, and then obviously with my wife being Italian, we try and practice.
Yeah.
But thankfully, one of her friends said to her, "Look, he's going to be trying to learn Italian properly. The first thing you shouldn't do is ask him every day, have you studied yet? Have you done your study? Have you put any time in? Like, leave him alone. He'll get to it himself. So don't be on his back about it."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So she's not on my back about it, which is fantastic. But then I've got that thing of where I'm sat right now doing a class. She can look through the window and look at me, and it's like she can tell when I'm either on YouTube or when I'm doing my Italian. So it's just like, "Are you studying?" And I'm, she's giving me the eyes. It doesn't come out, but it just comes through the eyes. I'm just like,
Yeah.
Practice my reflexive verbs.
It'll only click once you actually go there and start speaking it. As somebody who's learned 2 languages, it's never the same reading it from some book or watching some guy.
It's impossible.
I remember as my solemn duty as both a video game player and a weeb, I tried to learn Japanese for like 2 seconds. And so
you're in a club of millions.
Yeah, I got Duolingo, and that was, I think, my Fitbit moment where it was just like, hey,
yeah, exactly.
Oh, Duolingo
have you done
is
your daily
relentless.
vocabulary thing? I'm sorry, Kelly.
Duolingo is relentless.
Yeah,
weeks later, even it's like, hey, you haven't opened this in 5 weeks. Why don't you try again?
It's like, hey, idiot, we've got some simpler flashcards for you this time. Please get on.
But I just find with Duolingo, Babbel, all of these ones, and this is where we're not going to be getting sponsored, I guess. It's just they teach you really not very useful phrases and sentences and word structures, and it's just like I'm like on Duolingo, and it's just constantly throwing the same words back at me because I have to keep going, and it goes, "Oh, you haven't been back for a while. Here's a refresher." It's like, oh, I know these words or whatever. But then when I'm actually in Italy talking to people, it's like that didn't help me at all. Like there's nothing. But it gives you all these little achievements. Oh, I'm level 5 on beginner level 4.
You never had to ask anyone to borrow their bicycle or something in Italy? That didn't come up in conversation?
No. Maybe one day. So I think, goals that we have and that we can't achieve aside, let's try and kick off, get started with, we're talking
Let's
about...
talk about some people who did achieve their goals.
Yes.
And they achieved some incredible goals, this group. But I do want to make a disclaimer before we kick off, because I feel like we are approaching territory here where we are usually, if there are sticks to beat us with, maybe you could say we're not the kindest to some consoles or some sets of games.
Yeah.
And we're going to be embarking on a quite a heavy N64 episode here. I think maybe more than I've ever spoken about, at least on this. Maybe you guys did in the previous 70 odd episodes before I joined. But this is going to be this is the big one for the big N.
Yeah, I was actually, I'm very glad you're doing this, because I was going to make a content warning that we are going to be saying nice things about the N64.
Exactly.
So people who enjoy this show would probably not like this episode in particular very much.
And this is the thing, Arnie, like the amount of people I see interacting with us and on social media, the N64, especially for North America, it's got a huge place in everyone's hearts. Mm-hmm. So I guess the plea that I'm making here is, look, we have a lot of history to go through, a lot of games to go through. Do not get upset if we don't give the required amount of time to your favorite rare game, because there's a lot of rare games that are worth talking about. I mean, you guys did, I checked, it was episode number 10. You did a Donkey Kong Country whole episode for it.
Yeah, we sure did.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I had no idea it was episode 10. I thought it was like episode 40 or something.
Yeah, I thought it was like in the 30s. I didn't realize it was that early 10? On.
Holy shit!
We ran out of creative steam very early on.
So all listeners, if you feel super passionate about maybe us not giving or giving a bit short shrift to your favorite games, then here's a hint. Join our Patreon, get in on the Discord chat, and tell us what we should be getting onto next. Exactly. Because I get the feeling from this episode we're probably going to be asked to deep dive into some of these games. And I tell you what, after doing all the research, I'm quite up for it. It's great.
Oh yeah, dude. Yeah. I can't wait to do 2 hours on Cobra Triangle.
So, okay, where I usually try and kick off with this series, as if you're a new listener, then we've done a few episodes on other British developers. This one being, as I said, it's like the king or queen of British developer. It's one of the ones I tried to kind of not do so soon, but after a year now, it feels like let's do something that's got a good, got a good amount of energy behind it, and something that we can think of positively. So what I usually try and do is just set the scene in the first part, go through the history, a little bit of like the key things that led to the foundations of these companies, and like all of the British companies I've been going through, they all start in the very early 80s coding for the British home computer scene, which is your BBC microcomputers, your ZX Spectrums, and your Amigas and things like this. And these are all computers. I think me and Paul, we've spoken about these on a number of times now, about they were available in some Commonwealth countries, but these were really heavy British stuff we're talking about.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with Rare and the two founders, so you got Tim and Chris Stamper, they were two guys, or brothers indeed, who were into arcade ports. And were getting really well known apparently in the British gaming developing scene for being incredibly good coders. But what they managed to do, I think it was back in 1982, they founded their very first company, which was, they called it Ultimate Play the Game. Which, I don't know about you guys, does that
sound like a good name? Argument? That sounds like an argument where one guy was like, let's call it Ultimate Games, and then the other guy was like, let's call it Play the Game. And then they're like, let's compromise.
And who won? No one.
We lost is really what happened in that situation.
So it was it was a big start for them, because essentially what they did out of a typical thing out of the back of a boot of a car, or a trunk. Is it a trunk in the US?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. I try to make sure I don't use too many colloquial terms on these episodes. But essentially what they were able to do in a really short amount of time is just pump out game after game for the ZX Spectrum.
Yeah.
And you've got games that include Attic Attack, Lunar Jetman, Alien 8, and I think the ones that we've spoken before is Sabre Wolf.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So these games, go on, Arnie. Try.
I was just gonna say I briefly reviewed some gameplay footage for these, and I will say one thing that I found very endearing right off the bat is how frenetic they are. They're very, like, when I think of ZX Spectrum and like microcomputer games, I think of like very slow, methodical, sort of gotta wait for the load times and all that. But these are like go, go, go. And I don't know if maybe it's like more modern ports just make it seem like that, or if it was always like that, but it immediately made me like, oh, I could play this. I could really do this. It also reminded me that the title screens for all these games are just like seizure inducing. I don't know why they thought that like nice flashing bars of color in the background was like a good idea. Maybe people were just like hardier back then, and they were, you develop, you get stronger if it doesn't kill you. So
yeah.
Yeah, I think us Brits, if there's one thing we're good at, it's inducing comas upon the young adults. No, I have no idea why they choose that. I remember obviously a lot of going around friends' houses and booting up Amigas and waiting half an hour for these things to boot up. But you'd have to go and do something different for a while before you'd even consider putting in disc number 7 and getting it going. So
Hey
the
Kelly,
Caesar
I
engines.
know that you played. I know you played a Tic Attack on the rare replay.
Oh yeah.
How did you like? I know you used the walkthrough because, like, honestly, you look at a Tic Attack and it's just it looks like the biggest pile of nonsense. I have no idea what's going on in that game from watching the YouTube video. But like, how did you beat it?
Honestly, I mean, the walkthrough basically would tell you where to go, exactly what to do. So you just followed the walkthrough and it would tell you everything that you needed to get out of there. So
Now, were you able to understand what was going on in the game?
it wasn't too
No,
bad.
legit.
No, it wasn't too bad.
Okay.
I think I had a harder time with Underworld, which was a sequel to Saber Wolf. That one was more side-scrolling jumping, I believe, and I just remember I gave up after a few minutes because I just could not figure out how to get up and out of that place.
Yeah, I think they must have been in a funk when they came up with Ultimate Play the Game, because like if you come up with a Tic Attack, which I think is actually like a nice title, that like there's no excuse for you coming up with Ultimate Play the Game as like the whole company.
And it is strange because you've got, I think, a Tic Attack, but also a like Jetpack, as you're saying, they're so fast and frenetic. Like they really play into the fact that they were arcade, programmers.
Yeah.
It really fell in there. But yeah, indeed, when you go through, and I don't know, like Kelly, so the rare replay, are they just straight up ports or are they actually remakes?
They seem to be just straight up ports that I can tell.
Okay. So on a HD TV, you're having to play games with like one color palette.
Okay, the graphics, I mean, they look okay on the modern systems, but
I think having that like wide range of colors makes it a little bit more bearable. I think if it was just like blue yellow, it'd be like, oh, this is assaulting my eyeballs right now. But having like a nice spread of shades of colors, like, oh, okay, it looks like, NES-y, like maybe.
Right.
Yeah. The next step before that. Yeah.
I think the key thing, and a lot of British people listening will kind of relate to this. So we had something on our TV sets called teletext.
Okay.
So teletext was essentially, think of it like the internet through your TV.
Okay.
So you turn on the teletext, and each channel would have its own teletext system. But it would be like the old, I'm about to use a work term, but like old AS400 black and green screen work computer.
Right, yeah.
So it'd be black screen and then like up to 10 different colors, but it would be hundreds of pages all with different news. So if you wanted like fresh news, because it would get refreshed every 30 seconds, you would go onto teletext to see what's the latest news or even what's the latest soccer scores.
Oh, so wow.
Every Saturday afternoon, you're just sat there refreshing teletext, waiting for your football team to score a goal and always on the radio. So we were used to, from a really early age, we were just used to, I think I mentioned to you guys before, the 80s Britain, which is drab colour, Margaret Thatcher, depressing setting. And at the time, I'm so sorry, guys. At the time, you would look to America with real envious eyes for all sorts of things, for TV, for movies, for sport, for, you guys had Dallas when we apparently, we absolutely loved that show, apparently, Murder, She Wrote. And
Murder, She Wrote, my wife's favorite.
If you're looking for color, America in the 80s is probably your best bet, I would think.
Yeah. Color and hair.
Yeah.
Or both combined.
Gigantic amounts of hair.
So with these years, it's essentially what they were able to do was build up a big cash reserve, because we're talking about around 1 million owners, say even of just the ZX Spectrum, around 1 million owners, but then up to about 300,000 copies of their games were being sold at any one time. Yeah. And if you're producing 8 or 9 titles every year, ranging from $5 to $15 a pop, from a really small development studio, that is a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's probably, I would say the 300,000 might even be a low estimate if you, because these systems were heavily pirated as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
So there's probably a good chunk of the ownership that does own all these games just in like unlabeled like cassettes that they pirated off some friend or something.
Yeah, most likely. And it always felt, even when I was a kid, there was just, because I was into the Game Boys and Super NES, which was like £60 a game kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you had these, even the official releases were going for like £10. It was.
Oh wow.
There's very little reason to want to pirate it, but there will always be people who kind of go through that.
Yeah.
And so there's some really important things that came out of these years before the Nintendo time, and I just wanted to kind of go into a little bit around the culture in which they built really early on, even before they became rare. That we're going to see all the way through this episode talking about the games, and there's some really critical things. And one of the first things is Tim Stamper, one of the brothers. He's quoted as saying that they will basically, over 2 years, I think they had like one day off, and that was one Christmas Day, or maybe even half of a Christmas Day. Like, their life was developing. And they said that, he said, I don't feel it's any good having engineers who only work 9 to 5, because then you get a 9 to 5 game.
Jesus.
And if that is not the most crunch,
the
quote.
Most psychotic mentality imaginable.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But that's the thing, like when you own your own studio and you're the developer of the game, like you can say these things. Like,
yeah, of course.
If I really was passionate about my job and I was the one reaping profits from it, I'd probably work harder. I'd probably work more. Like, that's just kind of how it, and if it was like something like developing games, which one would think is inherently fun. I've known game developers who are like, ooh, this isn't as fun as it looks. But at the same time, back then, you have such a large stake in how a game turns out because there's so few people working on it. You're not just like a cog in the machine. So no, I'm not terribly surprised that these guys worked themselves to the bone.
No, but that's such a good point, Paul, because everything when you look through Rare, especially the N64 years, because that's when their team really expanded. Yeah, just all the developers just come out saying how much they just loved working there. They loved the rivalry between the different teams. They weren't even sharing what they were doing with one another. Only that the top bosses would see how the projects were coming along. So they created like an in-house rivalry. They were really able to create that sort of competitive, but we have a shared goal and a shared vision.
That's a good point, because I think about it now the way Paul says it, where it's like, if I was in an environment where I'm interacting with other people, I'm talking to them, we're like more engaged as part of the actual game making process, as opposed to being one guy stuck in a cubicle being yelled at by some like millionaire that I'm not working hard enough to like shade the box that's like going to be in level 7. I'd probably be a little happier in the first scenario than the second.
Yeah.
I think I would be as well. I think it's all about creating that, to use a modern word, inclusive environment, right? It's making sure that everyone feels like they're being involved, feels like they're actually contributing, and that they can make a difference. Yeah. And I mean, some of the games that they made that are you would call them genre defining, were made by a team of less than 10 people. You get some crazy things that came out in the 90s. Yeah. I think one of the funniest stories I read about how they created an environment that encouraged people to push boundaries and to work probably what in today's climate would be an unfair amount of hours. Is that they would have in when they moved their offices in the mid 90s, they ended up having a big parking lot with allotted spaces. So the higher up the chain you are, the closer you are to the front doors. That's quite an old school mentality of the big dogs get all the perks. But for the young programmers, for the young developers and what have you, what was happening was they were arriving in their mini metro or their, I'm trying to think of a really crappy American car. You're going to have to help fill me in. Think of
Geo.
Yeah.
Okay. But then they said they were walking through the car park, the parking lot, and as they go up, the cars obviously improve.
Yeah.
By the time you get to the front door, there's Lamborghinis and Porsches.
Oh my God.
And imagine it's just video game development, and they got Lamborghinis. But then you enter the front door, and it's just like everyone's treated the same, and you're all given the same, place to thrive. It makes you think, if you if you sit on the development of a game and it's as successful as what this group have done, this is how we reward you. Because it wasn't just the Stampers who had it. It wasn't like everyone had crap and then the Stampers had Lamborghinis. It was like you said, Paul, like everyone on a game would benefit financially. So you got all that kind of incentive.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot easier when your team is 10 people, right? Like there's a more equitable division as opposed to now when there's 1,000.
Right.
Exactly. So that was that part of the culture at Rare. But there was also which comes through a lot, and this is how the Stampers managed to get a lot of games out so fast, and this was their willingness to be patient with their developers and their project leads, and to not force things through. Which is a very modern way of looking at how you motivate and drive people, and it's not by barking at them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, have you guys, and Kelly, I'm going to have to change my language now, Kelly. I'm so sorry. I'm so used to saying guys. And that's really...
I'm used to it. Don't worry about it too much.
Has anyone here ever been in it, worked or had a job where you're just being barked at and told, here's your deadline and you've got no choice?
Yeah. I worked I worked retail for a little bit, not any longer than I had to, or long enough that I am able to really bitch about the experience. But it was more so like I all I remember is just getting yelled at by management and then proceeding on my way to be yelled at by customers. And so it really was
about the retail experience.
When somebody walked in and was nice to me, I was like, can I keep talking to you for as long as you're in here?
They're trying to leave the store, you're just clinging on.
I'm just like, please, just there's one more thing I want to show you. But no, it really was like, it was an environment that sort of prioritized like results, and it really wasn't about like, how do you get the results? It's about the pure raw number. And so it really de-incentivizes like any form of individuality or like personality, as insofar as it doesn't contribute to bigger numbers. And so that is
I think we've all had that kind of
soul-crushing.
I think we have, Paul. So the key thing that I felt like that came out when I was reading about that was just that feeling that Rare were, although they were, a second party to Nintendo in those key moments, which we'll get upon later in the podcast, they had that Miyamoto, what I would call Miyamoto kind of attitude towards game development. The whole delayed game is eventually good, a rush game is bad forever kind of mentality. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I mean, from what I can see, apart from one or two titles in the Nintendo years, they just absolutely churned out the hits, and it was a real relief to kind of read that that's how they were behaving, because that's what the feeling I always got from playing their games. That it came because they loved doing what they were doing.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is we're going to take a break now that we've seen a little bit of the history and the success of the company, and then we're going to go straight into the games that I'm sure people have heard of. So. Catch you on the other side. Hello, welcome back, and we are gonna kick it off this round by taking a look at how Rare ended up with Nintendo. So what was happening, obviously, when they were still called Ultimate Play the Game, was the Stamper Brothers created Rare on the side, thinking that at some point, as was the thing at the time, we're going to get bought out, we're going to get owned by someone, and we're going to want a little way to tunnel a way out and get away from being owned by a big corporate giant. So what happened was they managed to shift their entire catalogue over to a British developer, or publisher even, called US Gold. Anyone heard of US Gold?
Oh yeah, US crap.
Gold.
Yeah, exactly. So it's one of those seals of shit. that you could guarantee if you see US gold on a game.
God,
you
I
knew
love
what you
company names like that. Those are just the best.
Oh yeah.
Whenever your company
no
name is like great, amazing thing,
gold.
it's like, I know
Yeah.
to never buy anything from you. It's as true in video games as it is in anime, honestly. Whenever you see some company that's like, "An America #1," you're like, ooh, this is not going to be great.
Hopefully it'll just be so bad it's
Yeah, exactly.
fun to watch.
Yeah, that's the best we can hope for.
So with this, what the Stamper Brothers, and we're going to see this in the next 2 generations as well, what they were able to do, they saw the writing on the wall really early. And this is an incredible thing to be able to do in any business, in any industry, is to foresee the way things are going. And they managed to do it. So what they were able to do before the UK got the NES, they managed to get hold of a Famicom. They managed to reverse engineer it, take it, what their potential gains were, over to Nintendo in Japan and showed them, this is what we've been able to do with your hardware. And Nintendo immediately were like, you can imagine the holy shits going around the very corporate boardroom, probably not.
Yeah.
But what they were able to do, which is an incredible thing to think of, just a small, like a two guy team almost, just going over to a giant that Nintendo were becoming and getting an unlimited budget from Nintendo to produce games.
Do you think if somebody hacked the Switch and like showed it to Nintendo, they'd give them money now?
Please, dude. They'd send a fleet of lawyers after them.
Yep. You did what now? Okay.
They'd be in Supermax prison right now.
Exactly. And I mean, Paul, we spoke about this during the break, but when you look at the list of games that they then churned out on the NES, and this kind of goes a little bit against what I was saying earlier around the quality over the quantity, because in the NES era, they just churned out the games, and they were doing anything from license to ports, and of course to their own IPs. So the games that kind of stood out to me, obviously the NES being one of the, because I was a Master System guy. The NES, a lot of the titles passed me by, except for like the big classics. But the ones that stood out to me were there was the RC Pro-Am, because I had the Game Boy game when I was a kid. I now realise, because you have lots of games that you no idea what the name was, but you watch one video on YouTube and you're like,
yes,
I remember that.
Yes.
Yep.
So I had that one. Snake, Rattle and Roll, which lost on me, but that sold very well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And good old, incredibly difficult, but some people beat it in 10 minutes, Battletoads.
Yeah.
And I hate those people. I don't know. So I'm looking to you, Paul, and I'm so sorry, Paul, because of your age, Paul. What were your memories of Rare during this era?
Yeah, this is what I get in exchange for being the first of us to die eventually. I get to remember Nintendo games.
Worth it.
But yeah, man, I'll tell you what I remember about Rare. What I remember about Rare is that their games were fucking impossible. Like that's what I remember. Honestly, most of all, I had no idea. I had no idea until researching this episode just how many games they made for the NES, because they didn't publish them all themselves. It's all these different publishers who picked up their games.
Yeah.
So stuff like Anticipation, Double Dare, Taboo. I remember as a kid seeing Taboo, The Sixth Sense, and I was like, I wonder what that is. I actually still don't know what it is, but I am certain it's terrible.
You are not wrong.
With that said, though, I mean, like those are some games that, filled a particular niche. But when they were good, they were good. Like Battletoads was incredible. I remember renting that game so many times, and Cobra Triangle, the only, I think, motorboat game on the NES. It was fun. Also, impossible.
What about
absolutely impossible?
What about Eliminator Boat Duel? Is that not a motorboat game?
Are you being serious right now? That's a game?
Yeah. I know.
What system is that for?
It's for the NES, if I remember correctly. Now you're making me think I'm crazy.
No, dude. Just because I haven't heard of an NES game doesn't mean you're crazy.
Duel.
There's a lot of other reasons for that.
There's a lot of games there.
November 1991 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The reason I know about
corrected.
The reason it like is plugged in my brain like a parasite is because, and again, I'm probably going to be corrected, but I believe that on the American NES, every copy of it is misspelled, like on the spine.
Wow. Oh, I love that. I want to own it just for that.
Nice.
Sorry,
Anyhow.
Paul.
Those are my main memories from like rare games. Oh, and Marble Madness, that was another big one.
Yeah.
Snake Rattle and Roll is just good. It's just good. It's aged well. You know, it's aged well. Like, I mean, I hate to say it because it's impossible, but like Battletoads.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't play any of these games till once again Rare Replay came out, and I made sure to give them all a go. They're still still impossible. I still can't beat Battletoads, even with you have a save state where you can save anywhere. Still can't beat that game.
I was going to ask, because if it does, that's quite tempting. But that's on the 360?
It's on the Xbox One.
Xbox One.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's also on Game Pass now, I think, too. So if you've got that, you can play them. But,
oh, nice.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Battletoads, save anywhere, still can't beat the game.
Honestly, Kelly, like, I had that problem with, and again, I'm going back to Cobra Triangle. That game pissed me off so much, man. I borrowed a Game Genie from a friend of mine just so I could beat Cobra Triangle. I still couldn't beat it with a Game Genie with like infinite lives.
Yeah.
Fail.
It's called getting your money's worth, Paul.
I get, you know what? You're right. I definitely got my money's worth out of that game. There's no question. But like, I think it's the third last level. You have to fight a giant shark in your motorboat, and it's like, and even with infinite lives, every level has a time limit. So I couldn't. It's not that I couldn't beat the shark because I was running out of lives. The shark just never surfaced enough for me to shoot him within the time limit. It was infuriating. I'm getting very upset right now. Just talking. We have to stop talking about Cobra Triangle. I apologize.
I played Battletoads on the NES, but like way later, obviously, like, you know, maybe like 5-10 years ago. And I was like, this game is hard. So I was like, you know how I'm gonna solve this problem? I'm gonna get a friend to come and play it with me. And you know what? It made the game harder.
It makes it harder.
Impossible.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing.
How could you do this to me?
Yeah. And invariably, your friend, whether they actually are or not, they're always worse at the game than you are.
Yeah, of course.
And I don't know if that's a trick
because you've been toiling for 50 hours.
Well, that... And I also don't know if it's a trick of perception. Like, I don't know if my friend is actually worse at the game, or if I just don't really notice when I die.
Yeah.
Where it's like, that's not so bad. But when my friend dies, I'm like, what the fuck is wrong with you, man? You just screwed up everything for all of us.
Is it also one of those games where if whoever dies, you lose a life together?
Yeah. So no, you don't lose a life together. But if I remember correctly, once they run out of lives, they start taking your lives.
Right. Lovely mechanic.
And they just by default they can hurt, like you can hurt each other, which is just like evil. For somebody to program that in must have been like, I'm that asshole friend, so I'm just gonna assume that everyone's that asshole friend. Because I think in Double Dragon there were modes, and there was a mode where you could hurt each other, and there was a mode where you couldn't hurt each other. Correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And so like that's, I feel like, a fair way to do that.
Yes.
But in Battletoads, it's just like, no, that's just standard.
Yep. It's brutal, man.
So just a quick note on that. So Trade West, obviously the publisher of Battletoads, they also had the license, the rights to Double Dragon. That's how those two houses combined. I haven't actually played the Ultimate Team game. I think it's just. You have, Arnie?
I have. I actually played it before I played Battletoads because I found it on the Genesis for like $3 at a random like game convention or something. And I played it, and I thought it was really fun. I was like, oh, this is great. I was actually, it surprised me more because I, like, in my brain, I was like, I did not know that this was a time when like companies did crossovers. Like, I was like, this is, like, I was like, whoa, mind blown. Like, you know, that gif of like your mind expanding. That was me when I saw that game, because I didn't think, I was like, I know what Double Dragon is, I know what Battletoads is, but like I didn't know they were two great flavors that taste great together, you know?
Yeah. So let's kick on from the NES. Obviously, in the research, I found myself feeling that I need to pick up some karts. There's some games I need to get again on the cheap, because they're all really cheap. Apart from Battletoads, I guess.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff is pretty easy to pick up, and maybe Kelly, I just pick up that replay game once I have an Xbox.
Yes.
But the super important thing in this for Rare is just how much money they made. So what they did essentially was, instead of just doing the same thing in the next generation and kind of going, okay, we're just going to keep going the Super Nintendo, and we're just going to keep doing the same thing we've been doing the last few years. What they did was they actually went out and bought some Silicon Graphics workstations, some SGI, which were basically 3D modeling computers. And I had to kind of dive into this one a bit, because obviously it sounds impressive and it sounds technological, but these are actually the same computers that Amblin were using when they were making Jurassic Park to do the CGI for the dinosaurs. And it's when I read that, it sunk in how much money Rare were willing to spend to get themselves ahead of the game. Rather than just seeing their profits go up, it's a case of, no, we're going to invest everything we've got because we want to make the next. We want to be ahead of the game. We want to make the best of the next games.
Yeah, if you're spending Spielberg money, that's a bit of money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The element again for Rare was, how were they going to partner up with Nintendo? How were they going to show Nintendo what they could do with the hardware and with the machine? So once again, they find themselves over in Japan pitching to Nintendo, kind of going, look, this is what we can do with 3D graphics. So they did 3D models and what have you. And they were just kind of showing, I think one of it was like a demo of a boxing game, which later becomes Killer Instinct. And they were showing, what they were thinking of with the platforming, which ended up being Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
I would love to get from you all, like, your experience in when you first saw Donkey Kong Country running, or like how you first saw the hype coming. Because I remember on the Chrono Trigger episode, we're talking about how games came out of nowhere. Maybe that happened as well.
Yeah.
I know, Kelly, if you would like to start.
Yeah, for me, once again, I was big into Nintendo Power, so I saw Donkey Kong Country, before it came out, just advertised in Nintendo Power. So that year for Christmas, that was the top of my Christmas list. So every year I would get one game for Christmas, and Donkey Kong Country was that game that day. So wasn't able to play it on Christmas because, it's a family holiday. So very next day, throw that cartridge in there, and I played it. I think I probably had it beat 2-3 days later because I just couldn't stop playing it.
Wow.
It was
That's
a lot of
quick.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite a short game, but that's still fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, for Donkey Kong Country, the first one was pretty easy.
Yeah.
A few years later, I found a used copy of the second one, and I just remember there were a few levels that I just beat my head against for days on end, just trying to beat, because it was just that much harder.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the kind of the sentiment that you get like nowadays from gamers, where Donkey Kong Country is seen as that it was that next stage, that next step in that bridge towards 3D and and like the high quality sound and just the beautiful sprite art.
Yeah.
But also Donkey Kong Country 2 is generally seen as like, this game is just better at everything. It doesn't have DK, sure, but everything else is better in this game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Arnie, what about yourself?
For me, I actually have contemporaneous experience here. It's amazing.
What?
I know. I didn't get it when it came out, but I was playing it around, in the 90s at least. And I played the first one. I loved it. Immediately the graphics caught my eye because I was a kid. So like visually, I was like glued to it. And I played it. I never beat it. I'm not as good as Kelly at these things. I played the second one. The second one is my favorite. But I think what the first two really did for me was it showed what the beginnings of what Rare would do in games like Banjo-Kazooie and even Conker's Bad Fur Day, which is like inject a lot of personality into not only like the main characters but also the villains and the enemies you fight along the way. Like all very expressive, like they all make the noise. I always like jumping on the big crocodile guys with like or whatever. I always loved that. Like that was super fun. I remember when I think it's the second game when like you would lose. Like if Diddy Kong is your last guy and he gets hit, he would go down. He'd get like a black eye and he'd like have stars over his head and like be really sad. And that was stuff that I was like, oh, this is like really fun and cool. Like I like that all these characters like have a distinct personality that they show through their actions. Kind of like what we were talking about in Chrono Trigger. When you have characters that don't talk, it's always extra nice when they're very like animated and expressive, and you can see like how much work was put into that. And then the music was top tier. Like Aquatic Ambiance is still probably in my top 5 video game songs of all time. I love that song. That was like my favorite Donkey Kong Country level. Every time I got to go there, I was like, yes.
Yeah, I don't think we could get through the episode without. I couldn't say without mentioning David Wise, Aline Fisher, and Robin Beanland. Like, I think most people have heard of David Wise at least, but it's phenomenal, absolutely.
Yeah. And then just because I don't know if Paul's gonna mention it, but I did play 3, and it's not as good, but it's a Donkey Kong Country game. Like, it's not bad. Like I'm not a huge fan of Baby Kong either. I think his name is Baby Kong. But it's, it's a decent little platformer on the system. Like, you could do a lot worse than Donkey Kong Country 3.
Paul, what about yourself? You felt you were a bit too mature for Donkey Kong Country at the time?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't, but I thought I was.
Yeah, exactly.
No, the truth is the graphics were stunning.
Yeah. Absolutely
stunning. And it's funny looking back on it and thinking, wow, like this is, if there was ever any doubt as to which system was, quote unquote better between the Genesis and the Super NES, that was the thing that kind of put the nail in the coffin. Was seeing those Silicon graphics based games. It was like, wow, this is really something.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as the game itself, no, I didn't play it. I wasn't really much of a fan of platformers. I'm still kind of not. So I understand why people love it, and I understand why it's important, but it wasn't for me.
Yeah,
fair enough. I mean, and then another kind of question that kind of comes to mind after this is where does Donkey Kong Country? Because obviously, Arnie, we're talking about how it looks, we're talking about how it sounds.
Yeah.
But when you talk about platformers and it's about that real solid gameplay that pulls you through you can be with the character can have no personality.
Yeah.
But as long as the platforming needs to be solid, there's always the accusation that Donkey Kong Country, the first one especially, it's all glitz, but behind the scenes, it's a very average platformer. Do you think that's a fair is that a fair assessment for what Rare did?
I mean, if the claim is that Donkey Kong Country got extra shine from its graphics, that's absolutely true. Like, take this game, take away the Silicon graphics, probably not as special. But I don't necessarily buy the claim that, even, especially for the time, that this wasn't a good platformer. I feel like the mechanics are solid, the controls are there. It adds like different little tweaks with the addition of the animals that you can use and stuff like that. And like even like the secrets you can find, like the different ways to get around levels. Like, I don't know, personally, and I'm not an expert by any means, but I always thought that it was right up there with stuff like Super Mario World and the big heavy hitters in that space. So that's just for me personally. I don't buy that. I think they pumped its tires because it was so good looking and it was like so ahead of its time, and maybe that sort of became the more relevant factor when people were like talking about it. But looking back at it now, I think it holds up perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
And Kelly, what do you think? Because obviously you said you were desperate to get it. You got it as soon as you could, and beat Donkey Kong Country, and you love Donkey Kong Country 2. did it supplant? Did it get above any of like your classic Marios or any of those platformers for you?
Oh, I put it right alongside like Super Mario World. I really enjoyed both. I never did play the third one, but the first and the second one I really did enjoy. I like the fact that it was more about getting through the levels than collecting. That's my problem with a lot of the modern platformers, is it's more about going off and finding all the collectibles rather than getting through the level itself. So I like those older platformers where it's all about getting through those levels. And sure, there are some things to collect, but you've still got that solid platforming experience.
Yeah, and thank you for answering one of my next questions, because I was going to see like where does Donkey Kong Country still lives today, but what you said is the way I feel about it as well. Donkey Kong Country, especially Tropical Freeze, everyone was raving about it. I picked it up for the Switch, and it just felt like a collectathon. And I'm just like, I'm not here to replay every level 5 times till I find every piece. Like, I just want to get through the platforming because I'm here to play a platformer.
Yeah.
Not find secrets non-stop.
I feel like Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Wii did the best job of recreating that original DKC experience for me.
Absolutely, same for me. So before we move on, there were just a few things I thought were great little bits of info in my research for this one. And maybe I think most of us here are a little bit aware of the collector's scene, but the British release. So we got this game 3 days before you guys did.
Go pal!
Wow.
We didn't get Chrono Trigger, which is why I didn't make the other episode, because I'm just still so angry about it.
You got one on the scoreboard.
First. Yeah, not
this is like when the Harlem Globetrotters play the Washington Generals.
Yeah, we're just given a free shot. So we did get that, but we also got the Go Ape CD with ours.
That I am more jealous of, because I do love me some mid-90s butt rock.
Exactly. There's there's some great British bands. Oasis are on there, for example, one of our 90s legends of a band now. I highly recommend anyone who's listening who has not heard of this Go Ape CD, stick it, have a search on YouTube. Someone have all the tracks loaded up. There's nothing to do with the game. So don't expect a soundtrack like that $200 soundtrack that you have, that's out there. It's nothing like that. It's this proper original, real music, if you want to call it that. But then also, there's some little bits of how Nintendo and Rare interacted around this game. Like I said, Nintendo were really open and free in terms of the way they dealt with Rare. They were very hands-off. Apparently, Miyamoto would go to Rare's offices just to see what they're doing, not tell them what to do. Very hands-off. But there were little bits here and there that apparently we can give to Miyamoto. And that is Donkey Kong wearing his tie and him having the ground pound. Those were suggestions from Miyamoto. So there's some really good bits there. And then on the other hand, on the other side even, Rare, so the Stampers were the ones responsible for Wave Race being about jet skis rather than speedboats. So they were...
The Cobra Triangle sequel that Paul was desperate for never came to pass.
They were like, guys, trust us, that game was terrible. We need jet skis.
Yes.
Yep. So, the only other thing I wanted to say is Donkey Kong Country is one of my favourite SNES games of all time. I remember the 1995 Blockbuster Video Worldwide Championship, which is now like one of the rarest carts to find.
Yep.
Oh my god, yeah.
But I took part in that. I got my free participation medal in the form of Marvel cards. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Good old 90s adultness of giving everyone a medal. And I absolutely... I like Donkey Kong Country 2, but when that came out, and especially Donkey Kong Country 3, my eyes were already on the PlayStation.
Yeah.
So that was kind of why I was, Donkey Kong Country 2, yeah, it's good. And like Kelly, I found it much harder. So I also kind of wussed out and went over to play Theme Park on the PlayStation, probably.
Theme park.
And one of my favorite things of Donkey Kong Country, it's those first opening 2 levels. How you go from like that really slow cascading tune towards like that's the final kind of the big. I'm not going to even try and do the Donkey Kong Country theme, but it's a big crescendo and it really pays off. And then as you go towards the end of the level, it goes dark, the sun sets, and in the next level you get all the rain, and you can really feel like you're in a world. Yeah. It's not that Mario Bros style. Here's some randomly. Yeah, not always randomly. That's a bit harsh, but not as like disconnected levels. Whereas Donkey Kong Country always felt connected to the world it was setting itself in. Mm-hmm. So there's my input for episode 10. If you want to edit that episode,
there you go.
Put that in.
Graft Jeff onto the end of it.
There we go. So then on to the second kind of big franchise they had on Super Nintendo, which was Killer Instinct. Killer Instinct being the combo making, combo breaking 3D silicone graphic beat 'em up that was in your face in the arcades.
Yeah.
And it did a pretty good job at being in your face in the magazines and on the consoles too. I'm gonna go over to Paul to start with Killer Instinct. And we can talk the arcade version as well, because the arcade is like synonymous for its incredible music, the Ultra 64 opening, and all like the promise that was had there.
Yeah.
Paul, like, where did Killer Instinct sit in the beat 'em up world?
It really depends on who you ask. I think if you ask younger players, Killer Instinct was unbelievable. And if you ask older players, like late teens, early 20s, who'd kind of grown up on Street Fighter 2, it was kind of a lot of sizzle, but no steak. Mm. But with that said, it looked incredible. And it was a good game. Like, it wasn't bad by any stretch. Mm-hmm. But like you said, Jeff, that Ultra 64, part of the intro, that was something special, man. Because like that was kind of the sign of things to come, like the Nintendo Ultra 64. And we're like, holy shit, we're going to be able to do this at home, and so on. It was something. It really was.
And I still think it should have been called the Ultra 64. It should have.
Yeah,
that's a better name for me.
It is, but the Nintendo 64, I think, from a branding perspective, is probably better because there's no confusion, right?
True.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice and it's brief.
Yeah, but I'm not I'm not a marketing expert.
Well, it was the only console of their that did 64-bit and all of that, isn't it? So I guess they were in a market on their own. But I think either way it worked.
Good point.
What about yourself, Arnie? Was Killer Instinct on the SNES or arcade, was it ever something that you were aware of, or did it kind of pass by?
I think that I've done a very good job on this show of consistently embarrassing myself when it comes to fighting game talk. And Killer Instinct, never on my radar. Never registered. I don't even think I ever saw it in the arcades that were, at least the ones around my house. Like, that was firmly Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat territory until, like, Soul Calibur and Marvel vs. Capcom showed up. I don't remember ever seeing Killer Instinct be, like, that bridge in between. And, like, I never played the SNES game. I didn't play the remake. I don't know any of the characters. It's just, it looks like as a game, when I see people play it, it looks perfectly fine and playable, but there's nothing about it that's like, I need to go and get this game right now and experience it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't say, it's hard to say because I wouldn't necessarily say it's aged well. A lot of the stuff that's appealing about it, or that I found appealing about it anyhow, is stuff that was geared towards presentation, right? Like the guy's voice, the announcer's voice was I can't overstate how spectacular that was at the time, right?
Yeah.
Ultra combo, combo break, like the combo breaker. Oh my god! Like every time you broke somebody's combo, it was like an event. It wasn't anything special, but that announcer's voice really did make it special. The sound was superlative.
And how about yourself, Kelly? Because obviously, I think you brought up Gold, but did you get involved in the games before the N64?
I did have the Super Nintendo game as well. So
really?
I grew up kind of sheltered. So my parents did not want me to play the super violent games. So they knew about Mortal Kombat because that was the big controversy on TV. You had Mortal Kombat and Night Trap. So those games were not allowed anywhere near my house. But they didn't know about Killer Instinct.
The game
so
called Killer Instinct. That's
Killer Instinct. But before the ESRB ratings and everything else, you could get away with it. So,
also, it's on the Nintendo, right? So parents were like, "Oh, it's a Nintendo game. It can't be that bad." But
can't be that bad. So I did get the Killer Instinct in Orchid, of course. I mained Orchid. Not the best at fighting games, but that didn't mean I didn't try. Yeah. So, however, if I get mad, then I become amazing at fighting games. So the only time I can pull off ultra combos is if I'm mad at someone.
Oh my god, you're like a Super Saiyan.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the complete antithesis. The more angry I get, the worse I am at all these games. And the bar is pretty low from the get-go. Paul can attest to that. And the more frustrated I get, the worse it is.
And the other thing about Killer Instinct 2 is you were talking about the yellow carts on the Game Boy games for Donkey Kong, but Killer Instinct had the black cart. And it also came with the Killer Cuts soundtrack,
right.
At least over here. So yeah, I had that in the CD player,
Oh, so you guys got it was like the OST, wasn't it? It was the soundtrack.
Yes.
Okay, you got that. That's cool.
I forgot that it was called Killer Cuts. Amazing.
Oh yeah.
Cool. So good.
Oh. Take me back.
My memories of Killer Instinct. I do remember it in the arcade, and one of the things I found out was the bigger the combo, the louder the announcer was as well. So what was they deliberately did that so that when they're setting up the arcade itself, they can adjust the volume. Yeah, and they didn't people, the owners at the time wouldn't realize how loud that game was going to get. So it could completely dominate any arcade hall. So I love that about it. But me and Killer Instinct really frustrating. And it's because I didn't own it, and my friends who did own it were good at fighting games. And Killer Instinct is just, if you play against someone who knows what they're doing, it's possibly the worst fighter to play. Because you get caught up in like a 40-hit combo, and you're like, well, this isn't fun, is it? But that's why they did the combo breaker. But it's like, you got to learn to do the combo breaker.
Yeah.
This is the problem. Yeah, no, you get caught up in a 20-hit combo and you're just kind of sitting there with your finger in your nose. And just,
Exactly. So the on Killer Instinct, before we kind of wrap up the Super Nintendo era, like I think I mentioned him before, but Ken Lobb, he was the instrumental guy here from Nintendo of America. As I said, worked with Namco, New Fighters, and they had a real partnership, Rare and Nintendo of America, in constantly divulging in information and sharing what they were doing back and forth in order to make it as balanced as possible, in order to make it as fair as possible, but in order to make sure that it was a great fighting game, which is arguable. One of the things that I do find amazing, we brought it up, was just how the name Killer Instinct got past Nintendo. But apparently they had such a good relationship with Nintendo. They were like, yeah, do what you want. Yeah. Because you guys are printing money. Fine. Yeah. And it's an incredible thing for Nintendo at the time to have a game so violent. Because Mortal Kombat was on it, but they toned that down to a ridiculous level.
Yeah. I think that may have helped, actually. Mortal Kombat sucking up all this like controversial spotlight, and they're like, all right, let's slip this one in real quick while nobody's watching.
Worked in my house. So.
Oh, what? Wait, what? I have no idea how that got there.
So to wrap up, 3 of the best-selling games in the SNES's history are Rare games, sign of things to come. So we're taking our next break here. 16-bit done. 64-bit coming up. So hang around, guys.
Available for your home in 1995, only on Nintendo Ultra 64. Instinct.
And we're back talking about Rare, talking about the N64, the console that we all love. So don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. We love this console. Much respect to what Nintendo made or what Rare helped prop up. It's one hell of a console for this company. 11 games, some absolutely fun, like pretty much all the genres are covered.
Bangers.
All basic.
Bangers every which way.
Exactly. And, when I was doing the research for this, I think Arnie, you might be the most prepared, but when I was doing the research, I realized I was the least prepared because I was not an N64 owner. I played some of these games on the fly at friends' places, but never. So, look, we're looking to you here, buddy, to...
No, Rare is required reading if you owned an N64. There's no way to avoid it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be, obviously, before we go into some of the games, because there's just not enough time to cover all of them. And this is where the big disclaimer comes in. If we don't talk about your favourites, join the Patreon and tell us which ones we should cover next. Okay,
every time we talk about the N64, I'm reminded of we have like an iTunes review on the US iTunes store or whatever, and I don't know the full breadth of it, but it basically is like, this podcast has an anti-Nintendo bias, and then in parentheses, which is fine. And whoever that was really summed it up perfectly.
Oh man, the best part about it is that it really is just an anti-N64
really
because we have nothing but love for virtually every other Nintendo offering.
Yeah.
But the N64, boy oh boy. But hey, we're gonna say a lot of good things about it right now, and deservedly so.
We got to get it all out of our system for the next 100 episodes.
So let me just give a basis once again to what Nintendo and Rare were up to at this point. Obviously, Rare had struck gold with having 3 of the best sellers from the SNES library. The partnership was well and truly on track to become the real romance that we now know is what transpired. Rare itself, during this era, they went from around the 84 team to around 250 people. They moved offices. They moved from the farm barn they were situated out of, and they moved offices. I think it's within Leicestershire, within the UK. I'm not going to start saying names of towns because no one would have heard of them. But they're all just little towns. I think it's Twyford. I think Twyford was one of them. So yeah.
Man. Yeah. I love British town names, Jeff. Like I could just listen to you say British town names for the next 10 minutes, honestly.
Well, what we'll do is after the episode, we'll do a recording and then we can put it as Patreon extra
exclusive content.
Yeah,
there we go.
So there wasn't exactly a big change in the relationship. They very much stayed the second party favorite for Nintendo. Mm-hmm. If anything, Rare were just so happy to be working with a company that just gave them the freedom, gave them the untold ability to be able to go off and do whatever they wanted. But also what we're going to see in this is and like everyone knows, that Rare games were often stacked against Nintendo's own games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the key thing to know here is that maybe the games that they pitted against each other, or that the fans pit against each other when they're arguing about which kart racer is the best, is that maybe people don't quite realise where the influences came from, and they're not as obvious as you think. But before we do get into those games, I just wanted to just get a question out there, and I'm going to go to Arnie on this one.
Sure.
So I think it's easy to kind of go through now, but was the N64 able to survive as long as it did because of Rare?
I would argue yes. I would say that the N64 was going to be successful regardless, just because of Nintendo putting out the games that it did on the system. But the sustained success of the console after, a few years, I think was helped a lot by the entries that Rare put on that machine. Like you said, they were challenging Nintendo for dominance of that console pretty much from the get-go. And I think it could really come down to which are your favorite games. If you think that was really a Nintendo console or a Rare console sponsored by Nintendo. So yeah, I think they were an integral part. Like, I feel like when people criticize the N64, and I think it's a valid criticism, it's like the library is so thin, right? And then within that smallish library, the amount of games that are like universally thought of as good or worth playing, it's very slim. And Rare, I think, has more entries in that list than anybody else. So yeah, I think if you're going to talk about the success of the N64, you gotta acknowledge that Rare was a big part of that.
Yeah, it's hard to kind of look past it, isn't it?
Yeah.
The key, and you say about how successful the games were. The first one we're going to bring up is maybe a bit counter to that, but it just shows that not every company is always going to strike it lucky on every single release. So the first game that was actually came out, and I think a lot of people might not realize it was actually Killer Instinct Gold.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, I know that you had a bit of experience with this. Is it as bad as they were making out, or as people have made out, retrospectively?
I had a lot of fun with it. So if it was bad, I still enjoyed it. So you still had Orchid on there. You had Kim Woo that they added in, and Maya. Female fighter characters I always enjoy, so I always had fun. In the game, to me, it was fun. Very few titles out on the N64 that I remember at that point in time, so I was just hungry to get any game I could for the system. Yeah. So I ended up playing it a lot. I enjoyed it a lot. So if there was criticism for it, I was blind to it, and I enjoyed the game.
Well, I think back in those years, I think we were so cocooned away from everyone's opinion, that you just would have picked up a game that you think, hey, I like the first one, I've got the new console, it's an absolute no-brainer. So can't blame you on that.
Yeah.
And everything else aside, I'm gonna give Killer Instinct Gold a handicap, like a few extra points, just because of the controller. You're playing a fighting game on that controller.
Yeah.
Oh, good point.
You could be the greatest fighting game of all time, and it might not translate very well.
Yeah. With Killer Instinct done, the next game that came out it's a sleeper hit, and it's become a cult classic. Blast Corps. So Blast Corps, it was produced by a group of graduates. They were given an idea. The idea of just demolishing things and to see what you could do with the new hardware available to you. And what they made, I mean, I only ever played it a couple of times, but what they made was a hell of a lot of fun. I can see some smiles. I'm wondering, Arnie, is this one of the ones that, because I know you played quite a few, is this one of the ones that you got through?
This one I have very limited experience with. I've seen other people play it. I've played it myself maybe once. But yeah, I mean, I'm a sucker for games like this, like creative sort of puzzly type of games that sort of introduce mechanics that's not like a retread of things we've seen over and over again. I have all day for stuff like that, especially coming in as like an early release on newer hardware. Yeah, I would have, if I could have bought it myself, I probably would have back in the day.
It's an interesting one because I hear more and more these days, I hear people talking about it. Like if Anthony could have made it onto the episode today, he would have had a lot to say about Blast Corps. But back then, man, it just kind of came and went, and nobody mentioned a thing. I don't know, Kelly, like, did you see very much of it in Nintendo Power or anything?
No, I don't remember seeing the game when it came out. First time I ever played it was once again on Rare Replay. It's on there, so...
Oh, yeah, okay.
I turned it on. It's still fun today, so I'm sure it would have been a blast back then if I would have heard of it.
Yeah, so It sounds like I need to get an Xbox soon to get that replay game.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Same.
talking with no experience. So the next one, which is for me, the pinnacle. For me, it's already becoming the pinnacle of N64 gaming, and that's GoldenEye. The absolutely brilliant FPS that I loved hating.
Yeah.
And before I go into why I loved hating it, because you can probably tell I love hating Nintendo stuff apparently. but what's so incredible about the backstory to this game is just how much of this game was made before Rare even knew what the N64 was.
Yeah.
They'd been working on this for about 18 months with the Silicon Graphics hardware that they had before even knowing what the N64 was capable of. So apparently it was capable to around 3/4 of what Rare made for GoldenEye.
Oh wow!
But so they had to reduce, they say, around half the amount of textures. Because this is the thing about the N64, the textures were always a struggle for the games that were a bit more ambitious.
Yeah.
But it's amazing to think that how, as good as it looked at the time, Rare could have done more with it. And this is probably where it leans more towards what people were doing on PCs at the time, with the FPSs back then, which is where if you wanted to play a shooter, you just go to your PC. But GoldenEye was the one that bucked that trend. Yeah. This is a game that for as much as people loved the single player, multiplayer was king. And this is where I love to hate. So I just wanted to kind of go through why I love to hate it, and then just have a bit of a round table on this, because I think it's such a well-known game again. But the issue I had with GoldenEye was that my friends were really good at it. And all my friends had N64s and I didn't. And they knew all the secret passageways. They knew all where noobs. Proximity mine after proximity mine. And I just, the amount of times I would throw my mate's N64 controller, towards the TV along the floor, try not to damage it, absolutely infuriated me. But I could see it was an amazing game.
Yeah, I had the exact same problem as you, Jeff. My friends were so good at that goddamn game, and there was just no way that I could practice. They did this thing where they would hide behind a wall and do like this analog controller flick with their thumb, like this really quick flick, and shoot. And I'm like, how many thousands of times did you have to practice that in order to just kind of flick your character from behind the wall, fire, and man, oh man, I was in awe. And also really annoyed. Yeah. I was like, can we play Street Fighter now, please? Thank you.
It sounds like your problem is bad friends. What you do is you set it to golden guns only or slappers only. And then you don't have this problem. Then you have to play like men. Because I was also bad at this game. But we set up specific rules. Rocket launchers only was my favorite. That's truly don't even have to think about it. Just complete chaos on the map. But for me, it really was I did not have a gaming computer. I was not on the internet. I wasn't playing Quake. I wasn't playing any of these other shooters. So for me, this was my first multiplayer shooter experience. And I really enjoyed it. I think it helps that I'm also a Pierce Brosnan stan. Best Bond in my IMO.
He's your best.
So I was very excited when this game came out. I was like, oh, hell yes. And the game, I mostly played the single player when I first got it. It was a lot of the campaign. And that game, for me, the presentation of it, and I know I've said this a lot with Rare, but just oozes style from the main menu where your cursor is a crosshair to selecting all your save files are dossiers. And being able to, use who can forget the pause screen where he looks at his watch and it's the super dope UI that they hid from everybody on the main screen.
And you can see he's wearing a tuxedo. It makes you feel like you're Bond.
Yep. Yeah. To shooting guys on the toilet with your AK. The sound effects were so good. I remember loving shooting guns in that. Because everything from the PP7 silence shot to the Kalishnikov like full auto sound, I was like, man, this feels satisfying to shoot these guns. Like it really feels like I got some oomph behind this when I'm mowing down people in this game. So, you know, everything like proximity mines, I was like, I've never seen anything like this in a game before. Like to throw something that like goes off when people get too close to it. Like it was a very early game for me, so it's very influential in like how I see games like this.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head a little bit there, Arnie, which was that you didn't have a PC.
Yeah.
Because when I saw GoldenEye, I was already playing Quake and I was playing Tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, GoldenEye can't hold a candle to those games, like not even close. But if it's all you have, and also the fact that it's local multiplayer makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
Like there's just nothing like multiplayer for building camaraderie and memories instead of playing online, right? So I think those two things really would have helped, because it's not. That's the other thing, man. Like I remember playing it and I'm like, this isn't very good, you know, compared to what I was playing at the time. But actually it was. I wasn't really appreciating it for what it was. Yeah.
And it's a game that made good use of the N64 controller for what it's worth.
Yeah.
You know, as stupid as it sounds, like the fact that shooting was the trigger, I was like, oh, this is like another level of immersion for me here, because it's like, it feels like when I'm going to shoot a gun, how do I shoot a gun? And pull the trigger. Oh, it feels like it's very natural to go into that motion. And I think they did a good job of that all around, like in integrating this abomination into a competent game.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as well the how they were able to make it feel like you were really, especially in the levels where you had to be a spy almost, where you had to be silent. I mean, I know we have Metal Gear Solid as our game of 1998, which was a stealth game, but also I'd never played a game where you have to think about the number of times you're going to shoot your gun and who's around and who could possibly hear it and how you're going to take people out and how you're going to put strategy behind it.
Yeah.
And I, you know, you read things about how they were able to create, and it seems quite obvious now, but almost like a cone around the player when you fire a bullet, and how every consequential bullet you fire afterwards increases that cone around you. And then if there are guards within that sphere or cone, then they're alerted. And it's all this, you know, really simple thing around shooting someone in the leg, and how you would see the character model change, or how you shoot them in the hand or shoot them in the head, and how they were able to blend that together into what we'd just never seen in a console game before. It also really added to the immersion.
Yeah, and when you're talking about opening screens for video games, like when you turn them on, I mean, I have a hard time thinking.
Pretty good.
And then the screen goes red. Like that's awesome, dude. I was like hooked from the second. Even when you die, your screen going red and you like falling down, like the camera sort of goes. I'm like, oh, this is so cool.
It makes you feel so much more than you're just like a floating gun. You know, you're not. It's not just like another Doom. Where at least with the Doom, I guess you do get the, you know, Doom guy's face kind of deteriorating as he gets killed, as he slowly dies. But the GoldenEye really made it feel like, especially the opening shot where the camera would pan to then go behind Pierce. All these little extra things were just able to immerse you into the story, into the single player especially.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm done gushing now.
So some of the things about the development of this is really quite interesting. So it was led by a gentleman, Martin Hollis, project lead. It was like a computer scientist, so he was more on the technical side. But we're talking about a team of around 9 people, most of which it's their first game.
That's unbelievable.
It's so unbelievable. I had to double check every time I saw that come up. I'm like, it can't be. It can't be. You can't produce this kind of game with this small of a team. And apparently the multiplayer was created by 2 of the developers in the space of around 6 to 8 weeks. If you think of that, but then also think, it's ridiculous. And it came out 2 years after the movie, so they weren't even tight. They weren't, because even I remember at the time thinking, oh, GoldenEye game. But the movie came out ages ago. That's a weird bridge. but no one cared.
Yeah.
If you got a good game, no one really cares.
If you see that box art, you're like, oof, I gotta try me this out.
Exactly. So I feel like we could probably, the only way to kind of settle our gushing comments is probably to have some sort of local multiplayer. Maybe one day in the future we'll be able to go into Paul's basement and settle some scores on GoldenEye. You never know.
No Odd Job. Only
no, Odd Job's outlawed.
Flappers only.
No question.
Oh, but on the Bond characters, apparently the franchise owners, Eon, they stopped Rare from being able to use the other Bond likenesses.
Yes,
So
I
they
remember
weren't able
hearing
to
about
use-
this because they were originally going to use Connery and Dalton and Rogers, I think, as well.
Exactly, which is a bit of a miss. But like I said, you can have all these little details gone if the core game is as good as what GoldenEye was.
Yeah.
So that's GoldenEye, possibly the most influential FPS on any console. Next up is a game that does bring out the rivalries. It really pits gamers against each other, it seems, and I never realised it until years later just how split down the middle Diddy Kong Racing and Mario Kart are in terms of the preference.
Yeah.
So for me, like when I dove into this, when they said actually Rare had never seen Mario Kart running. They didn't even know Mario Kart 64 was going to come out. They based this on Mario 64 and Mario Kart on the SNES.
Yeah.
Like, to have not have seen Mario Kart, to do all the development, and for it to be, what some would argue, better than Mario Kart, I think this is a phenomenal achievement.
Yeah. It comes down to the people who think Diddy Kong is the better game and the people who are wrong. Very heated discussion.
Yeah, having played Mario Kart 64, I tried Diddy Kong Racing, but I never played it very much. But I did play Mario Kart 64. I don't know. I don't think there's any question. Like, Kelly, did you play either of them?
I only played Mario, so Diddy Kong I didn't like because I didn't have many N64 games myself. So it was going over to friends, and all my friends had the Mario, so that's the one I ended up playing.
Yeah. Diddy Kong Racing is arguably my favorite Rare game on the N64. I adore that game for a lot of the same reasons. It's just so full of personality and so colorful, so vibrant. The mechanics are really awesome. You get hoverboats. Nobody else has ever done hoverboats, and hoverboats are the best. There should be more
That's pretty cool.
hoverboat games. But they really nailed like the three phases of it because there's cars, there's planes, and there's hoverboats, if I'm remembering correctly. And each one of them does control slightly differently, but each one of them controls well, which is, I think, the most important part. Because if they had fucked up even one of them, I think the game would be near unplayable as a racer because it's so important. And this is one that I don't remember ever playing multiplayer. I probably did a couple of times, but this was for me a single player sort of deal. So in that sense, like if I was going to play a multiplayer racer, it was most likely going to be Mario Kart 64 because that's the one most people have played. But I think Diddy Kong is head and shoulders better in almost every way. And I think it's because they based it off Super Mario Kart rather than basing it off Mario Kart 64 that it ended up being a more enjoyable racing game.
That's an interesting point because I always struggled with Mario Kart 64, to be honest with you. I loved Mario Kart on the SNES. I wasn't very good at it, but I still absolutely loved playing it. But Mario Kart 64, maybe it was at Turnpike, Raceway, whatever it's called. I think maybe that just infuriated me too much. But it didn't give me that sense of speed that Mario Kart did as much, and it just felt a bit too barren or bare, maybe. Like, I don't know, it's a really hard because Mario Kart today is just full, isn't it? It's just everything's flying at you, everything's happening, there's colours galore. But the N64 felt quite, obviously you could see it was good at the time, but when you look back now it's like it just lacks. Whereas Diddy Kong, I've only played it the once, but it does, like you say, on it has that rare amount of magic and charm to it, and just colour. It's a really good looking game.
Yeah.
So obviously Mario Kart, Diddy Kong Racing, people are divided down. I don't think we're not going to have any arguments here about. But where we might have some people disappointed is the next one. Banjo-Kazooie and Banjo-Tooie. Put them together because we recently gave Banjo-Kazooie one hell of a ride on an episode. And I don't know how you feel, Paul. Do you feel guilty with how it just got dumped out in the first round in a King of Games against Metal Gear Solid?
I feel guilty that it didn't get dumped harder.
If I could go back in time, there's one place I would go. You think people would be like, oh, stop Hitler, like, save Kennedy. No. I would go back and I would pick Banjo-Kazooie over Metal Gear Solid.
If I could go back in time, I would go back to selecting people for that episode, and I would have put something in your drink to make sure you were not available that day. To make sure that Metal Gear actually made it through, which it did, but
it did.
That was hilarious. I'm super happy with that episode. And look, Banjo-Kazooie is a great game. I didn't dump on it. Yeah. It's just it's just not Metal Gear Solid, right? So.
But I mean, this is the thing; they are completely different games. So let's not bang the Metal Gear Solid drum too much here. So, Kelly, wondering, the Banjo-Kazooie game, did you play the N64 or have you played it on the replay at all?
I played a bit on replay, and that's it. 3D platformers just aren't my jam too much, so
yep.
I did play it a bit. I can see why people love it so much, but it's just not a game for me.
So
I feel exactly the same way.
You guys don't like collectathons. You don't like being given an unlimited amount of things to go and get. That's
Correct.
Not your thing.
Yep.
No, it's got a lot of charm, but if it's not your kind of game, it's not your kind of game, right? Yeah. There's nothing else to kind of bring you in there.
It's a game of an age, right? Like, it's very much, you pop it in and you're like, oh, I know exactly when this game was made, when this was popular. But yeah, for me, I love it. It was one I used to go to my cousin's house and she owned it and we would play it constantly, all the time. I don't think I ever finished it because I don't finish things. But it was extremely enjoyable to play. Same reasons. Like, the characters are great. You running into all these like tertiary characters, the like weird sounds that they made because they all gave them all voices in like the most insane way possible. Where like Banjo just
so
like
yeah,
all the time. And was like, I was just like, as a kid, I was like, oh, this is fucking great. Like,
you're probably thinking, is this how they talk in England? Because this is.
But it just had like a really nice kind of, I don't know, sardonic's the right word, but it had a humor to it that was very enjoyable as a kid, and of course very colorful, very like bright, whimsical. The music is really good, in my opinion, a really good soundtrack that's probably up there in the N64 list of soundtracks.
Yep.
And just from beginning to end, just like a nice, enjoyable experience. I went back and I played it fairly recently, actually, because I was trying to see if I could beat it, and I had a pretty good time with it, but I just ran into walls, and like there's only so many times I can collect feathers or collect Jinjos or collect honeycombs or music notes before I'm like, okay, like I get it. But in isolation, in bursts, very fun game. As to play now, to be like, I'm gonna like try to finish this game, it wears on you a little bit towards the end. I'll admit that.
And that's the same for Banjo-Tooie for you?
I have much less experience with Banjo-Tooie. Like Banjo-Tooie, right. I know some of the early levels, and it's a little. If you like the first one, you're gonna enjoy the second one. I don't think it lives up to the heights. And I think for me, it's because Banjo-Kazooie was like bright, new, colorful, all at once. Banjo-Tooie is like, oh, it's more of the same. There's not really like a factor that makes it like take that next step. It's just like, here, you wanted more of this, here's more of this. And in that sense, it plays its role perfectly. But it doesn't do it for me as much as the first one did.
And then maybe that's probably a good segue to kind of depart this IP, which is it was an incredible success for Rare. Many people still today put it next to Mario 64.
Yep.
Which
finally made it into Smash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very true.
It's if we were talking about iconic gaming characters from the 90s, Banjo-Kazooie I think is one of the most memorable in terms of like the looks and the design. It's like you said, Arnie, it's a product of its age. And going back to it now in terms of a gameplay, I think it can jar a lot of people. But if you like collecting, if you like collectathons, if you like platforming, these games are some of the best. Yeah. And they don't have, in my experience, the barrier that kind of stops you from kind of going, oh God, I got to keep going. It's not as there as it is in other games. For example, Jet Force Gemini, which next on the list had one of the most, when I found out even, it has one of the worst ways for you to get to the final boss, which we see more and more in gaming.
This one I have no experience with.
Is this a game that anyone has experience with, Jet Force Gemini?
No. I played it for about 45 minutes on Rare Replay.
And what was your takeaway?
I mean, third-person shooter. It was okay, but this was a few years ago, and it didn't really leave a lasting impression on me too much.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the way it is remembered in general. I think it's.
I think so. Yeah.
When I was looking at videos for it, it looked like an okay third person, but when I heard that you have to collect all of these koala things to get to the end, but you have to replay levels with different characters, with each of the 3 characters to find different things within the levels, and you can't go back to find the final whatevers. You got to do it all over again and over again and over again. It's like, man, that this just sounds like an impossible game to go back to today.
I want to take the temperature of the room on something that Paul might know if we've talked about this before, so stop me if this sounds familiar. But games in general that do not let me proceed to the end of the game, for whatever reason, whether I have to replay some stuff, whether I have to collect some stuff, especially if I've picked the wrong difficulty. That's my personal personal go to hell.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Like I understand that you want people to like play this game and get their money's worth or whatever. That's fine. I've already paid you the money. You have the money. Why do you need to punish me by not letting me just get to the end of the game unless I do it in your specific way?
Yeah. And it's made worse when you see a visual representation of the end. Like if you have the door to the final boss,
yes,
but then you can't open the door for whatever arcane reason.
Yeah.
Just don't show me the door. Like, just, you know what I mean? Like, make it so I can't even reach that point, and I will be that much happier. But when you show me that door, and then I have to go collect something, dude, I hate to say it. And thankfully, I didn't have this experience, or it may have colored my perception of the game a little bit differently. But Phantasy Star has something like this.
Oh, really?
Where, you can make it to Lassic. With the not the final boss, but like the sub-final boss.
Okay.
But if you don't have a crystal that you find somewhere in the tower leading up to Lassic, he just kills you. Like you can't beat him. You literally cannot beat him. He beats you in one shot. And there's nothing in the instruction book that says you need the crystal. In the instruction book, it just says the crystal will help you to defeat Lassic.
Oh, good.
And my first playthrough, I just happened to find it by accident. Like there was nothing to indicate where it was or whatever. So I can't imagine what it must have been like for people to reach the end and then not actually be able to beat it because you didn't find this random ass crystal somewhere in the tower. Like, man, oh man. Yeah, no, Arnie, I agree. Like that's
I've got to agree with that as well.
So these are the reasons today why Jet Force Gemini is people, whenever you see people trying to recommend it, they say this is the big caveat, because otherwise it's a beautiful looking game. I think it did, from what I could see, it struggled a bit on the frames, just because they were trying to push so much. And I think this is rare because they obviously had different teams competing against each other, like we said earlier, and working on different projects. This was one where they were trying to break new ground with a third-person shooter, but still try and keep true to the aesthetics that they were working with. It didn't quite, like history isn't so kind to Jet Force Gemini.
Yeah.
But the game that history is really not kind to, Donkey Kong 64.
Oh boy.
Woof, woof, woof.
Beautiful yellow cart.
Beautiful yellow cart.
This and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. Beautiful shades of yellow.
Yeah. Perhaps we don't want to spend too much time on this. Essentially, I found the first game that you had to have the expansion pack.
Yep.
So that cost Nintendo extra to produce that and to get that out with the game. It put the charge onto the customer as well.
Yeah.
And by and large, just a really unenjoyable experience for anyone who was hoping for a new Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah.
Just another collectathon.
Yeah.
I think
I was
gonna say I think the best part of that expansion pack is that it let you play Majora's Mask later on. I don't think anybody really remembers it for Donkey Kong.
I don't even mind the concept of an expansion pack because it was relatively inexpensive, right? If it's not a 32X, right, where you're basically shelling out almost as much for an entirely new system, it's fine. I'll pay the extra for the extra RAM if you give me good games. But if you give me Donkey Kong 64, yikes. Just more to collect, more to collect.
Exactly. It just seemed like the philosophy was, okay, let's make another collectathon, but this time let's give people more shit to collect.
Yeah.
And it just,
how far can we push this before
and it just
people
kept
don't want to do it
ramping up,
anymore?
and Donkey Kong is just like the glut of stuff that you have to... Is it like bananas, coins, like weapons... Like, there's so much shit in this game. Plus, there's 7 characters or something, and you have to collect everything for every single character.
Oh,
to unlock levels.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. You have to unlock... All the levels are gated by specific amounts of collectibles, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. It's easy now to look back on that and think, my God, what a terrible idea.
Yeah.
But I think even at the time it was, because at the time, I know that if I got an RPG and it wasn't 60 hours, I was like, well, this is bullshit, right? Because back then that's just how it was, right? I had infinite time and I wanted value for my money.
Yeah.
And I can see why they would have thought that would work with Donkey Kong 64, but I think even at the time, it was like, no, this is a bridge too far, a banana too far.
Donkey Kong 64 was a game I played at much like 1080, I played at my dentist's office a lot. That's where I never owned it.
I fucking love that you play. I never get tired of hearing about you playing games at your dentist's office.
He had
but it's whilst you're sat there.
No, it's in the waiting room. You don't get it when you're in the thing. They have a TV. I watched Fly Away Home. I watched Free Willy probably a couple times.
Jesus Christ, man!
The Mask.
All I watched was myself getting maimed in the mirror. That's all.
But the Donkey Kong 64 one, even when I played it, I was like, I feel like the solution to that, because I liked the multiple character idea as a kid. I was like, oh, hell yeah, I want to play as Donkey and Diddy and Lanky or whatever his name was. But the fact that there are unique collectibles to each of them was the thing that I was like, what? Just make a set of collectibles that any character can collect and make specific levels for each character. And it solves your problem right there, in my opinion. I was like, you just made this game 7 times more cumbersome, because not all of these characters are fun to play with, but I now have to punish myself by collecting all this stuff with each character when all I want to do is play as Diddy Kong all the time.
Still better than reading National Geographic at the dentist's office, though,
I'm
right?
sure. Well, it was Zoo Books for us, I think. That was the
real. So what we're going to do, we're actually going to need to take a break here. And then we'll be back finishing up with the N64 and then tying this all up with Rare and Nintendo. As there's obviously a lot of Rare history post Nintendo, but we are going to be sticking with the big N to the end of this episode. Yeah. So stick around and we will see you all here back in a moment. Welcome back. Here we go, everyone. Final part for this episode. It's a long one, so thank you everyone for staying tuned as we get through this. We're going to kick it off with the follow-up to GoldenEye, which was Perfect Dark. A game that did need the expansion pack for the single player.
Yep.
Obviously, the multiplayer is what drew everyone in, but the new weapons, the frankly stunning graphics, the female protagonist, which was still back then, still rare, even though we had Lara Croft.
Yeah.
Joanna Dark was still, in a league of her own in a way. And yeah, I mean, I remember Perfect Dark for me was the shops in my local town pimping it out, putting it on a gigantic TV screen right in the middle of the store, and the N64 on any TV bigger than, I don't know, 32 inch, your eyes starting to bleed a bit. So it was, I was like, oh my, you can't even see what's going on. It was
really
just
stretching out those polygons.
Yeah. But when I played it on my friend's N64, you could see the step up from GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Like technically, graphic, everything was like, this is a step up. It might not be James Bond, but oof, what a brilliantly made game.
Yeah. It also, I always hear people boast about the improved AI, even in multiplayer. You could definitely, by yourself, have a decent, good multiplayer game, which is probably
on your own.
Great for people who want to practice to kill their friends.
Yep.
Also, shout out to Free Radical Dave on Instagram, because he's a huge Perfect Dark collector. I didn't realize how much swag was made for this game. Like, there's a glow-in-the-dark frisbee, there's like keychains and like t-shirts, all sorts of crazy shit that, like, I'm sad that we don't do for games now as much. Like, everything N64 and back, I feel like you always find some people who are like, oh, have you seen the Mario Tennis branded tennis balls? And I'm like, what?
Yeah. But that was back when collectibles, in quotes, commas, were actual, rare pieces that only certain people got. Whereas today, like, every game's got a limited edition.
Yeah.
Old man, yellow cloud type of thing. But Perfect Dark. Did anyone else give this one a go?
I don't know if this is exclusively like a me thing. But whenever I hear people who I hear talk about Perfect Dark the most, who are like, "Oh, Perfect Dark, that's the game I grew up with," it really is like a lot of British people. Like, I feel like over in the UK, like, Perfect Dark was the game, and over here in America, like, GoldenEye sort of never relinquished that throne to Perfect Dark. Even if Perfect Dark was the superior game mechanically, like, when you went to a college dorm or like your friend's house or something, you were playing GoldenEye 9 times out of 10 rather than Perfect Dark, at least in my experience. Yeah, I think, with my friends, what have you, GoldenEye was still the go-to. Perfect Dark was quite an expensive game when it came out as well. We're talking about games now that were coming out at a time where people were starting to own Dreamcasts. People were starting to get into PC gaming a bit more. Yeah. And it felt like this incredibly fantastic looking game. Yeah, but there's more options now. And I think that's where it suffered. I think it just got caught up in a big kind of a bubble of some exceptional games around that time, around the year 2000. Yeah. Very, very competitive marketplace. Very different to what GoldenEye was found itself in. Yeah. And I don't know. Personally, for me, spies over sci-fi at that point in my life. Though I did love the aesthetic of it, was great. Yep. So then moving on, Mickey Speedway. Mickey Speedway. Apparently, from what I hear now, very good game. People talk about this and Beetle Adventure Racing as being sleeper kart racers on the N64. Have not played either of them myself, so I cannot speak to
I think what I'm going to do is I'm gonna pick like a random, 4 out of 10 game on the N64 and just start pimping it on our show as like the next sleep. And I just want to see what happens.
See how the price ticks on.
Make sure it's not Star Soldier.
Just remember, it's a hidden gem.
Yeah, just keep saying hidden gem. Grow your hair long, big beard, hidden gem. There we
Jeff,
go.
you
Hidden
know
gem.
that's not possible. Why are you rubbing my face in it?
Get a wig?
Yeah. Paul, come on. Kelly's giving
You
you a
gotta
great
use those
solution
Patreon
here.
dollars wisely.
Yeah.
So I think this is a
Start
positive
thinking in
investment
solutions,
in
Paul.
your future.
Okay, so moving on. Conker's Bad Fur Day. The cult classic that we are not going to be able to give too much time to, unfortunately. There isn't a strong amount of experience here.
Yeah.
But it is relatively considered one of the best of the whole library in Rare on the N64. It was their last game on the system, full of profanity. It's got an incredible development history in how it was very nice and very sweet and very charming.
Extremely British. Probably the most British game out of all these, I would say.
Are you telling me that British humour is about big piles of excrement?
No, I think that
how humour is. Is this
no,
what,
I
is
think
this,
that
is this
I
what
would
I'm
take.
hearing?
See, that's the difference. If this game was made by Americans, it would just be a big pile of shit with eyes. But because it was British, the big pile of shit with eyes also sings in like operatic like stanzas or whatever that is.
It's a good point.
We would never take the next cultured step of like making the big pile of shit like a very refined individual.
So yeah, got a game here. Conker. I don't know if you see it where the First for Figures have got a Conker figurine now.
Really?
Where he sat on his throne with the crown on.
Oh God, what does that go for? Like $300?
Probably more.
Probably more.
Yeah.
And yet it was a strange one because Conker did start off on Diddy Kong Racing. He was always floating around the Rare offices, but Nintendo, they didn't want to touch this. They didn't want to publish it.
Can't imagine why.
It's hard to imagine with someone being drunk at the start, needing Alka-Seltzer to get themselves going. But THQ picked this one up over here in Europe, so it was a bit of a strange one. But at least it did find itself a release, considering, like you're saying, how British it was. I'm wondering, Kelly, if this one has, because I know we got a remake on the Xbox.
Yep.
But I'm presuming the replay has this one, and it's worth giving a go.
It has both. The games themselves, they play well. Not my kind of humor.
Yeah.
I actually had Conker given to me back in the day, the original N64 version. My boyfriend at the time, now husband, but he was doing a play at school and they had a whole bunch of N64 games as props. And he got to bring them home. And Conker
he got to
was
bring
one
them
of the
home, or he just kind of brought them home.
We'll say he got to bring them home, and we'll leave it at that.
Parody.
But
statute of limitations is expired.
Probably, but yeah. So I had Conker on the N64. Both me and him tried playing it.
Yeah.
Strangely enough, it wasn't even his type of humor. So when I needed money for rent a few years later, it got sold off. And I can remember thinking, why am I getting so much money? Because I didn't realize exactly how much of a cult classic or anything else it was at the time. I just knew I needed rent money, and that was the first game that was going to go. Yeah. And I was shocked. I think I got $25 for it at the time, and oops, if I would have known what I know now.
I mean, I want to say the first time I played it, I was 9, so it was my type of humor.
Oh,
very
right. Oh my God, yeah.
Super into it. But I never owned it. I had to go to my friend's house. We lived in an apartment building, and he lived down the hall. And he was the kid whose like mom would let him have anything. Like as far as like content was not a barrier. So like I had to go to his house to watch like South Park. I had to go to his house to play Conkers. I had to, like he was the bad kid or whatever. But I remember watching it and just being like blown away that this was on my Nintendo 64 at the time. Just like, I can't believe what they're saying, what they're doing. Like, it's like, because it's all front loaded. Like, it's not like it hides, it's not like it hides anything up front.
It's in your face.
And then it's like, oh, you got to play like a couple hours and then it gets real. No, it's like within the first 10 minutes, it's just like, oh, okay, this is the game we're playing. Gotcha. But I remember having fun with like the multiplayer, on it, which I don't think a lot of people like talk about a whole lot. And generally, like, we, this fart and sex jokes, like, we were, as kids, we were like, this is, comedy will never reach the heights that it is at this moment. And I recently went back to it again. I was just playing a bunch of Nintendo 64 games for some reason, and I went back to it, and I don't know if, like, as a kid I was just better or I didn't care as much, but like the controls, like, I could not do it on the N64. Like, after a certain point, I was like, my hands hurt. Like, I can't.
Wow.
Like, I can't hit jumps accurately. I feel like it's kind of floaty. I don't know. It didn't work. I have Live and Reloaded, but I've never played it on the Xbox. And that was one thing I wanted to ask Kelly is, do you feel like on the Rare Replay, the fact that they've sort of, I don't know if they've remapped controls to sort of fit in with the Xbox One controller, but does that make them, do you think that makes it better or easier to play? Like, does it feel, do the controls feel good on that version?
The controls felt fine for me, for what I played of it.
Yeah.
I'd say I probably played about an hour and a half before the humor once again just got to me. But I had no problem. I had no problem with the gameplay itself.
Yeah.
It was just, I could tell it was not my type of game.
Yeah.
It wasn't aimed towards me.
It's a good thing to know that all my toilet humor gifs and memes, I won't be sharing them with you, Kelly. So don't. I now know. I don't blame you.
Hey Arnie, let me ask you: Do you know whatever happened to your friend, the one who was allowed to have all the content?
Honestly, I lost contact with him like
okay,
years
I'm just
ago.
curious if he turned into like, the kind of person who doesn't use turn signals. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, if I had to guess, if it's Puerto Rico, it's either that or he became like devoutly religious, like within a couple years of me ending contact with him.
Right. Yeah. When you go over too much to one side, the side of and then you have to go and correct. There has to be a correction
somewhere in there. But I appreciate him molding my my being into the beautiful individual you see today. I also played Resident Evil for the first time at his house. That's why I hate that fucking dog that jumps out the goddamn window.
So, everyone and listeners, we made it to the end of Nintendo and Rare. We didn't go through some of the Game Boy stuff, but we got to the end of the relationship, and you can probably hear my voice. It's one hell of a journey. Oof, it was a long one. It was a long one even for us. We end up in a space with Rare where the Stamper brothers on the top of their game. They are, they made a lot of money for themselves, obviously a lot of money for Nintendo. They managed to make a game that they felt was for, and this is on Conker, they quoted as saying that they wanted to make a game that was for people who were playing games in the 80s that they made, and not everything needs to be for kids. But obviously Arnie's experience says otherwise. I think it says more about British humour than it does about anything else. So that does make me reflect a little bit on what my feelings around comedy and impressions on comedy is. So I'll have to think about that tonight. But we are at the end, because what happens in 2002, Microsoft do a Microsoft, and they take Rare away from us. And when I say us, that's what it felt like. Honestly, that's what it felt like to me. It felt like Rare was this company, and I'm not talking about it from a British perspective. I'm talking about it from a gamer perspective. It just felt like Rare were just there for the gamers and cared about making good games and cared about making games that gamers wanted to play. And Microsoft back in 2002 were just this faceless, although you got Bill Gates, this big faceless, Goliath of a company, stepping on everyone's toes and just basically saying, we're now going to dominate the gaming market. And you know what we're going to do? We're going to take away your most beloved independent developer from you. and we're going to force them to make games on our console.
They dropped some money bags on them too. Like back in 2002, what was it, like $375 million to buy it?
Around that, yeah. Which is in today's money is probably 2-3 billion.
Imagine that in Canadian money,
Paul. In Canadian money.
Can you imagine?
Well, that's Canadian pesos.
That was like the whole GDP. They were like, damn.
Just buy Canada instead.
Ubisoft Montreal's become a good outlet, so they could have done that with the future thinking. All those Assassin's Creed games.
Yeah. But I like the last question you put on here, Jeff, and I think it might be worth asking whether this was the greatest second party of all time. Because it made me think, I was like, second party? I don't think that's a word that's ever like crossed my consciousness before this moment.
But I mean, it really is, right? Like it's a developer exclusive to that system, right? Like Technosoft, I think, for the Technosoft made a game for the SNES, but it was mostly for Sega.
Yeah.
Like they all kind of had their people, and I don't think there's any question Rare is like. I guess I'd have to give it more thought. I'm saying there's no question, and meanwhile, people are going to be like, "Are you kidding? What about this? What about that?"
Well, I looked up second-party developers because I'm like, I don't know who these people are. And most of them that I found were Nintendo. So you're talking about
exactly.
If I was thinking of
like
financially successful, culturally impactful, I think Game Freak has a pretty big claim to that. But that's like. That they are the one thing. Like Rare
they make money.
is beyond the one franchise. Like Rare just has so much stuff. But as a single-minded entity, stuff like Intelligent Systems is probably more comparable to Rare than Game Freak is. And they're also, I mean, they've got their own pedigree, but yeah, it's hard to like Rare is just from the NES to today. It's just always been there. Always doing something, good, bad, ugly, it's always been around. You've never forgotten about it. And it was really one of those that, like, at least for me, when I was growing up, you did know of it as a company. Like, I didn't know I don't know all these sub B teams. Like, Ozzy was great at just listing off, like, development houses that I'm like, I have no idea who any of these people are. But you talk about Nintendo, Sega, Microsoft, Rare, like I know who Rare is. Like I would say their name amongst like big developers that I need, like Rockstar or like Bethesda or BioWare. So yeah, you gotta give them those props at least.
So I have a final question for Kelly as well. So in 2012, IGN did a like the best developers of all time kind of list, which is always deliberate to get clicks because everyone's going to disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rare were 36th. So when I saw that, I was like, God, that's quite low considering how highly some of their games are held in like greatest of all time lists.
Yeah.
That's pretty low. So when I read that, I got all Michael Jordan here, and I thought, I took it personally. I really did. Absolutely shocking. So I delved a bit deeper, and I was like, right, who are they below?
I was just about to ask, do you have the list? Like, can you give me the top 10 real quick?
Well, I don't want to be here and badmouth groups of people who have put a lot of work into games.
Yeah.
I do want to just say a few developers that I just think we've got to think it's 2012.
Yeah.
Right? Harmonix are above them.
I couldn't believe it, dude. It was the first one.
Yeah,
they're number 35.
Exactly.
Really?
And I was like, really? Harmonix?
Yep.
They made Rock Band? Okay, that's great. But like
Amplitude,
yeah. And
Frequency.
was it Dance Central or something?
Dance.
But, like,
okay, I love Dance Central.
But then you've also got Level 5, which did Ni no Kuni and Looking Glass Studios. Yeah. And it's like, wow, 9 years on, here we are. But the question's, Kelly, is it me or is that just the biggest part of bullshit you've ever heard? What do you think?
I think that's a bit low. I also think we're looking at 2012 here.
Yeah, yes.
So you've got they peaked like Super Nintendo and N64 era So I'm afraid that they just got forgotten about by 2012.
Yeah.
And so where do you think they are today?
I have a love for Kinect Sports that probably no one else in the world has, and Sea of Thieves. So I would rank them higher.
I played Kinect Sports Does anybody know what Top Golf is before I even get into this discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we have them here.
Neither of you, Paul and Jeff, know what Top Golf is. It's basically it's basically a driving range where like you can drink and people bring you food.
Yes.
Okay.
So it's a great time. And I vividly remember being at this Top Golf, and in this little waiting booth area, when you like walk inside, there was a Kinect Sports hooked up. And I played, I think it was like a whitewater rafting game. Kelly, do you know what I'm talking about?
Was it Kinect Sports or Kinect Adventures?
Kinect Adventures, that's what it was. And
so that's
half drunkenly playing this whitewater rafting game. I had the time of my life, so I'll give Rare props on that. They did create something fun, but I think Kelly's right. I think if you look at it, if this list was being made in '95, Rare's probably much higher than it is. But you know, I guess Grab by the Ghoulies just wasn't everybody's cup of tea. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Yeah, they're top 20, man.
Yeah,
I'm going through that list, Jeff.
Yep.
And like, dear God. Okay, I mean we can talk about Game Freak and we can talk about how much money they make, but they've made Pokemon.
Yeah.
That is it. And every subsequent Pokemon game, you know what they did? They added more Pokemon and made the same game.
I'm sorry.
Rare.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt you right there. Have you played Pokemon
dear
Puzzle
God.
League? Pokemon Mystery Dungeon? Pokemon Conquest?
You know I edit these episodes. It's not even going to make it in. But when you look at the sheer amount of different quality, high quality games that Rare has made, like a lot of the developers that were listed above them, HAL, really? Like they made Smash. That's it.
Exactly.
And I know they made a few more. More, but like really, it's like it. There's no comparison, man.
Yeah.
Like the sheer amount of high quality, different styled games that Rare cranked out for well over a decade. I mean, and going into Kinect Sports and Sea of Thieves, it's not like they're just not as prolific as they were. The quality is still there as far as I'm concerned.
And I mean, having access to like Nintendo IPs helps. Having, doing stuff with like a movie tie-in like GoldenEye probably is, you know, you're not struggling for attention when you're doing that, as opposed to
I know,
being
but I would
sentenced
say
to sort of create peripheral games for, what was it, a few years there at least.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say, like I mentioned on the GoldenEye, you know, they were developing these games before they even knew what Nintendo had up their sleeve with consoles. They were reverse engineering consoles before anyone else was getting their hands on them. They were pioneering 3D graphics in a 16-bit era because they wanted to be the future. I think it's, for me, you know, I guess my closing thoughts are it was a company full of aspiration. A company full of freedom and an openness to allowing people to develop what they wanted. Some of the greatest games they made were made by people who'd never made a game before. There's some phenomenal talent that came out from this company, and they're still in the business today. Yeah, they're still revered today. You know, not only the Stampers, who walked away around 2007, I think they left the company, as well. Like the composers, David Rice. You've got Kevin Bayliss, who did character modeling for Donkey Kong Racing. Martin Hollis, he was GoldenEye and Perfect Dark Project lead.
Grant Kirkhope, composer for Banjo-Kazooie and so on and so forth.
So you have these engineers and developers, like I think it was Steve Ellis, who on his own pretty much did the GoldenEye multiplayer, you know, stuff that is now iconic. And it was all done by people who just had an idea and were just given the freedom to try. And I think that's to me is why Rare will always be considered, especially by the British audience, as like a true gem and a real tragedy of where they are today. Maybe that's a bit hard, but a tragedy of what became of them in the noughties.
Yeah,
they are slowly stepping back up, but under the wing and under a different leadership.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's where I feel Rare will remain in the conscience of a lot of gamers.
Yeah,
and I'm just going to ignore IGN from this point on. So thank you.
Probably a good idea.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, listeners, for hanging around.
Yeah.
We are the Region 3 Gamers. Please leave us a like, subscribe, however you want to interact with us. We are here. Arnie's our social media manager. He does an amazing job. So thank you, Arnie, for that. And we will catch you on the next episode. Thank you very much.